right, folks, welcome. Here we are, ready to take our first steps into creating some actual animation using pose-to-pose animation. So, circling back actually to our 12 principles, today the key is our switch from one type of animation to another. So, if we remember back to our video from the great Mr. Alan Becker, talking to us about one of the 12 principles, which was straight ahead and pose-to-pose animation. Straight ahead animation is very much like what we did with your names, where we spelled out your names over time, one drawing at a time in order, right? So start with C, take my name for example, start with a C, then we had CH, CHR, etc. So we built, starting from the beginning, one frame after another in order until completed. Now, reminding us of what Mr. Becker had to say, essentially you really only want to use that for stuff where you need to draw out the details in a straightforward fashion, frame to frame, how things will change. For things, the examples they gave were organic things like fire, water, these kind of things that would have physical aspects that you would want to draw out frame by frame to make sure they're following from the one before. Now you would use your onion skin for, like we did with our names. Now today, we are switching to the primary method of how we will be animating for this year, which is pose-to-pose animation. Which is to say that we plan out animating between set key poses, a specific pose that should be struck at a particular time. And the term we use for that is keyframes. So if we take an example from that video that I'm referencing, the Alan Becker 12 Principles video, we have to have our key poses of starting position, and then my crouch for anticipation, and then my jump and my highest point, and then my anticipation as I drop down, and then back to my resting spot. So those are all my key poses. Now, in between all of those key poses will be what we call in-betweens. So let's talk pose-to-pose. So keyframes are those key poses that you set to happen at a particular point in time. And then once you have your key poses set, in our purposes for using the computer will figure out what those in-betweens should look like based on whatever settings you feed into it about how those should be created. So you have your keyframes and then in-betweens that are created by the computer. And so now as we talk about the Toon Boom aspects of it, setting a keyframe is how you set for those starting points in time. So let me go over to Toon Boom. And I'm going to extend my maze for 60 frames because it is not extended yet. And so, if I create a drawing layer, I'm going to call this just ball because I'm going to just start with a ball. And I take ellipse, say red. Right, so I got a red ball here. Whoops, I made it on frame 60. I want this on frame 1 to 60. Okay. So right now I just have a ball. My ball just sits there for 60 frames. But if I want to animate it so that it moves during that 60 frames, I need to add a peg to this and then animate on the peg. So if I go back to this, you'll see under set keyframes, keyboard shortcut is F6, or on your timeline, you'll see a nice big plus KF button. Does the same thing. Keyframes, as it says here, should be primarily set on the peg layer, avoiding keyframing your child layers. So the relationship between a peg and a drawing, which I have right up here at the top of the notes, are described as parent and child relationships. That is the vocabulary term that we actually use for that. So you will see if you hit the plus sign here, there's an option called parent peg. That is what is happening here. Our drawing of this is supposed to be a ball. This is B. So our drawing of ball here is the drawing that I just made. And then it's just like if you had your parent drive you to school. You are the child sitting in the passenger seat, and then parents are driving the car. They decide where the car is going. In the same fashion that your peg decides where this drawing is going. So if again we come back to harmony, right now for 60 frames my ball just exists. It is just there. If I go to, so there's two options. You can either hit this little orange icon here, this was in our last notes, or if you just have your drawing selected and you go to the plus sign, add parent peg, boom, you will see I get ball dash P with my ball inside of that peg. And then if I press F6 for set a keyframe, I have set my starting point in time. I'm going to come up here to my translate tool and zoom out because I know my pivot point is set in the center. So I need to move it onto my ball. But then, say on frame 30, I want this here. In frame 60, I want this, here, and I'm holding shift to keep it straight. So now, my drawing, again, you can see, just exists for 60 frames. Then these keyframes decide, at frame 1, ball should be here. At frame 30, ball should be here. At frame 60, ball should be here. And then the computer has thought that these are the in-betweens that we would want to make for that motion. Now, obviously, there are some issues with that because the computer is in-betweening it with an arc, which, as a reminder, is another one of our 12 principles. So, Toon Boom is not being dumb by giving you these arcs by default, because that is the default method of motion. Most all things move in arcs, right? So, for our purposes today, with our Pac-Man, the arcs are not useful because Pac-Man does not move in arcs. So we will need to change the primary behavior of our pegs, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I just want to point out that the in-betweening worked. We set key poses, and the computer gave us in-betweens. And then it's up to us, as the operators of the tool, to make the decisions about how these in-betweens should be created. So let's take a look first at our motion path, which will allow us to see the path that our ball is going to follow. So I'm selected on the ball peg. You'll have to do this for each peg. I'm going to go to View, down to Show, Control. And so when you have this active, you'll see this little orange path going along here. And that orange path is your motion path. Where is this layer going to go along this? Each of these little hash marks represents one frame in time, and so you can see that they're all equidistantly spread following this path. Now, when we are on, or when we have our motion control path, we can then now change settings about particular points along this path. So again, now that I have my control visible, if I flip back over to my notes, this motion path shows us what are called the control points. Essentially just where are your keyframes located on this path. And those control points allow you to control certain aspects of the behavior of those keyframes in time. What will happen to in-betweens that precede this point in time? What will happen to in-betweens that fall after this point in time until the previous and next keyframes, respectively? So to turn this toolbar on, because we need it all year, you would go to Windows and then Toolbars. And so you'll see here if I go Windows, Toolbars, there is one for control point, and that is the one you will need on. And when you have it on, you should get this little bar here. It might show up over here. Depends on I think my screen resolution is screwed up. So, but this little bar here, it'll say frame, There'll be some options here, TCB and some numbers. And you shouldn't be able to edit it by default. So there's, I'm clicking on here, nothing's happening. Okay, so how do we edit these control points? That brings us to the tools that we use when working with keyframes. So these are animation tools. We'll talk about Golden Guy in a moment. So we have our transform tool. You're going to use the transform tool for one very specific function, which is editing your control points. What I would point out, folks, is that, especially for my returning champions from Maya, this very much operates like when you control using the all channels function. So like when you're using the center of the manipulator to move things in 3 dimensions, or spinning things with the blue outline on the rotate gimbal. Transform tool just straight up sucks. So I don't suggest you use it. The only thing you should really use it for is when you need to keyframe on all of your channels, which is what it says there. We'll talk about that as it comes up. More on that next week, basically. And also, when you need to select your control points. So, again, the problem is that we're trying to solve the Tokyo drift through this point. So to fix that, I'm going to take my transform tool, and I'm going to click on my control point here at frame 30. You'll see it becomes pink. And now these settings in my control point menu can be changed. Don't need to mess with these. Locked in time just means that this is a keyframe. Cool. Don't worry about this. T, C, B. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at page 2 on the notes. So there are 3 settings in here that you can change for each individual point along your motion path. First one is continuity. Continuity I don't really mess with. This is the outcome we are more or less looking for our paths. So continuity of -1. You can see it sharpens the transition. Continuity +1 creates this McDonald's arch, I guess. Continuity, cool. This is the one we're looking for, though. Tension. And I'll skip over that for a second. And then bias, which is the B. Bias just, as you can see, pushes how the transition between this point, if it's biased to before it hits that point, if it's biased to after it hits that point. Again, not something you're going to use a lot of. This one, though, tension, this will come up quite a bit. Tension controls how sharply the path bends as it passes through a control point or keyframe. So if you need more roundness in your arc, say if you're doing a bouncing ball, you'll need a little less tension. If you're trying to follow a sharp, discrete path like our Pac-Man will and our ghosts, you need a tension of +1 to keep it sharp. So now that I have this control point selected at frame 30, again, transform tool, click the point, tension to +1, enter, and boom. Now our ball moves through that point and goes straight down. Fantastic. So going back to the notes. So now I've set keyframes at particular points in time on the peg layer with my motion path visible. I can select them with the transform tool, and under the control point toolbar, I can change the effect of the tension. Now, the other tools that you have at your disposal, we'll be talking about rotate more in depth a little bit next week as we try to finish up this Pac-Man project. But it works exactly as you would think. It spins around the center of the peg. The scale tool will allow you to change the size of something, either animated, so if something is changing in size over time, or if you're not changing something over time. So that brings us to the Golden Guy. So remember, or actually, I don't know if we didn't watch animator versus animation in here, right? Or yeah, we did watch it? Oh, okay, cool. I'm going to remember if I watched it with both my classes. So with that, Golden Guy is our teammate. That is our animator helper. So when golden guy is visible, we are animating. So that means any changes that you make with these animation tools, the transform, translate, rotate, or scale tool, will be saved as keyframes on whatever layer it is that you're selected on, be it the drawing layer or the peg layer. And you should never have keyframes on your drawing layers. They should only be on the peg layer. You wouldn't let an 8-year-old drive a car. Maybe you would, but you shouldn't. So you want to make sure your keyframes, these little black dots here, are cleanly on the peg layers. But if I wanted to make a change that was permanent and persistent, that uses one of those animation tools, I would just want to make sure, hey, go take a coffee break, Mr. Guy. Why don't you go chill? You've been working hard. So now we're on red guy. Golden guy is taking a break. And then I could go on my scale tool on this and just hold shift, and I can make it much smaller, and then that would be persistent throughout. And then I would just go back to animating my business. I could do something like that, what have you. So that is the basic application of what we are talking about today. So now I'll get into the specifics of what we are doing with these. But the takeaways, folks, when you have a drawing layer that is put into a peg, to create animation, you set keyframes at particular frames in time. So frame 48 would be at 24 frames a second, 2 seconds into your animation. As an example, where will this object be at that time? When you set all of your keyframes, you'll then decide how you want those in-betweens to come out. And then at the end, you do that enough times till you're all done with your animation. So let me reset this. Whoops. I guess that's fine. Let me see if it'll behave now. So I'm going to close this and reopen it. All right. So, from our last adventure, you should have a color card in here, your maze in here, and now I want to extend this timeline all the way out to 240 frames, which is 10 seconds, right? 24 frames per second times 10, 240 frames. So my maze is only one frame right now, so I'm going to extend that all the way out. And I don't need Pac-Man maze anymore, so I'll just turn that off. Not going to delete it. I just don't need it here right now. Actually, I will need it in a second. So now we're going to bring in some things to move in our maze. So I am going to start by setting up my Pac-Man, and then I'll bring in my ghosts. So I actually do need my maze back on. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to add a new drawing layer, which you can either do from the plus sign, or it's this icon right here. Add new drawing layer. This is Pac-Man. And now, on frame 1 of Pac-Man, again, you must be smarter than the tool you operate. Click on the frame that you mean to edit. So I'm on frame 1 of my Pac-Man layer. Ellipse. I need to make a new color. My new color is Pac. Boom. There we go. Got a nice yellow. Holding shift to make a perfect circle. And fill it in with my color. And then I'll just take my brush, vectorized line. That is way too big. Boom. Eyeball. Perfect. And then here's the key. Every half second, I want Pac-Man to open and close their mouth. So I'll start by extending to frame 12. Just right click, extend my exposure. Cool. So Pac-Man has closed mouth for 12 frames. Now what I want to do is to select my drawing. So select tool. I'm going to grab this drawing here. And I'm going to copy. So edit, copy drawing object, or Command C. I want to go to frame 13. And then here's the key. I'm selected on frame 13. Click back into the workspace, so that is your active area. Paste. And now you'll see that they are separated drawings. And now what I can do to this one is take my eraser. I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to erase to there. Erase to there. So now I have mouth opening and closing. So now I just need to extend this to frame 24. Where am I? There we go. I wonder. Oh, that's pretty poggers. Ha! Okay, let's go. So what I just did there, so you can either do it one of two ways. The basic way, folks, if you're just if you're about to get your mind blown by what I'm about to show you, you can just select these frames. I'm selected on frame 1. Select, hold Shift and click on frame 24. Copy, and then just click on frame 25. Paste, and just keep going along. Paste, 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 etc. Or if you want to be fancy, this is a cycle of things that we want to go back and forth in intervals. So I can just select these frames here. Again, if you want to be fancy, go to create cycle. We want to cycle this 10 times. Hit OK, and boom, it'll fill it all the way in. And so now, mouth just flapping the whole time. Let me turn this off. So mouth is just flapping back and forth. Again, our animation so far is just drawings opening and closing. Just drawings, no keyframes. Cool. Okay. Now, I'm going to add Pac-Man to a peg. So I have the drawing layer selected. I'll just hit this peg layer. Okay, cool. We'll come back to Pac-Man when we're ready to start animating. Now we need to bring in the ghosts. It's time for the spookies. So you'll see that on Classroom. There are the Pac-Man ghosts available for you. There are both types of ghosts. The regular ghost and the vulnerable ghost. You will be using both. So I have this and this. I can go to File, Import Images. So just like we did with the background. So start by finding one of the ghosts. So I'll get regular ghost, open. Again, create layer and original bitmap are A-OK. So we'll just hit OK on that one. Now I have a ghost layer. And now I just want to do the same thing. File, import images. This time I'll bring in the vulnerable ghost. Hit OK. Now I have both. You'll see that they are not the same size. So, as we just discussed, I need to scale this down, my vulnerable ghost, but I don't want to animate that change. So we got to tell Golden Guy, let's take a break. We're going to put you on animate off. And that way I can hold Shift and scale this down, and it won't set a keyframe, right? It's just going to make this a little smaller. All right, cool. Now I can go ahead and I'm going to select the main ghost layer and add that to a peg. And now you see I got ghost P, my ghost peg. But I also want my vulnerable ghost to be in there too. So I'm going to drag vulnerable onto the word ghost P, and that'll drop that in there too. Now, don't worry about the fact that the vulnerable ghost is on top of the regular ghost. Right now, I'm just going to turn that off. I'm not going to worry about that layer. Okay? So now I got Ghost P, which I'm going to drag up here, so that is by my Pac-Man peg. Cool. So I have Ghost P with my 2 ghosts, Pac-Man P with my Pac-Man, and they're both should be extended all the way to 240. Perfect. So before I turn Golden Guy on, now that these both are matched in their scales to one another, now on frame 1 of Ghost P, I want to scale both of them down, holding shift, until it can fit through the hallways. Which, let me see here. Yeah, I think that's right. Cool. So we'll put that there. All right. And now we have, again, set up our ghosts to be the same size. They're in the same peg. Pac-Man has the intervals of the mouth opening and closing. And now it is finally time to set keyframes. So, Golden Guy, come to our aid. Golden Guy is on. We are animating. And I'm going to start with what is the Pac-Man doing. So I'm on my translate tool up here. These are where your animation tools are at. Again, you don't want to animate with the transform tool. This is more for just clicking on the control points. So switch over to your translate tool. Again, I'm on the Pac-Man peg, but you can see the dot is up here in the center. I'm going to move that right on down to the center of Pac-Man. I'll zoom in on Pac-Man. And so I'll start with just F6, set a keyframe there, and I'm going to move Pac-Man all the way to the end here. Whoopsie, I did not click on my frame. So let's say, how long do I think that this should take? Let's say 24 frames. I'm on frame 24, I move this over here. Boom, you'll see this line connect these 2 keyframes, which means that it is in betweening these keyframes. Now, as I said, for each peg, you need to turn on the control. So I'm selected on my Pac-Man peg, view, show, control. Great. Now, I can see how fast my Pac-Man is going. So this took 24 frames. Now, I am going to have Pac-Man go down this way. So if this took me 24 frames, how long do I think this will take? Let's try 8 frames. So I'm going to do 32 frames. I'm going to push this holding shift. I'm going to drag this down to here. Now I can already tell that this is not right, but either way. So the problem is that Toon Boom's trying to be helpful, and it's giving me the arc here. So this is when you'll swap to your transform tool. Click on that control point. It'll be pink. And then again, tension over here to 1. Enter. Boom. So now we get the straight lines. And I can see this is slightly off, so I'll push this forward. Okay. And now if I zoom in here, the easiest way to figure this out is, does this make a square? Because these are the distances that this Pac-Man is traveling per frame of animation. So do these look equivalent in distance? And if so, they'll make a square. This is actually a little too fast because there's too much space here. So I'm going to drag this out to frame 34. And now, oh. Maybe I was wrong. Let me undo that. Yeah, I don't want to put this on frame 33. Let's see, how does that look? Oh, frame 33 is right. Of course it is. So, frame 33, boom, this looks like a right triangle. Or this makes a square. I don't know why I said that. It makes like the little thing that you put in a right triangle. Cool. So I know that my speed is equivalent because those distances are equivalent between the frames. So now if I'm going to here, how many frames do I think that is? This was 9. So, I don't know, 16? So I'm on frame 33 plus 16 is 49. Push that to there. And again, someone's probably noticing, hey, Mr. Meyer, Pac-Man doesn't turn. We'll handle that next week. I promise you it's coming. Don't bother me about it today. So, same problem though. Tension still whack. Cool. Select this. Tension to 1. Back to business. So I'll grab my move tool. I can zoom in here. How does my control look? Actually, I'm just so good at this, it's unreal. It's almost like I've taught this for 10 years or something. So, there we go. Nice. That was, what did I say? 18? 33? No, 16 frames. So, 12? No, this is this distance, so 9. So 9 frames in the future. So I'll go to 58. Move tool. On my peg. Move it down. I'll adjust my tension so that I can check my work. Phenomenal. I'm going to have my dude now go all the way to here. So here's where I'm going to start guessing a little bit. This is, what did I say? This is 16. This is 24. So 40 frames. So 40 frames from 58. So let's say in frame 98. And we'll get this guy to here. And again, transform and change this tension. Wow, I'm actually just too good. It's unreal. All right, so that would just continue and continue. So let's switch gears to the ghost, because there is a little bit to do with the ghosts. So first of all, the ghost does not, and really should not, match the same speed of Pac-Man, but they also shouldn't be going 200 miles an hour. The ghosts in the game do actually move faster than Pac-Man while they're not in the vulnerable state. So yeah, I don't expect you to change the acceleration of your ghosts based on their state. I'm more or less just saying, like, your ghost doesn't need to move at the same speed of Pac-Man, so don't worry about trying to line things up perfectly that way. But going back here, so I have both of my layers visible right now, or exposed right now, I should say. Vulnerable ghost I turned off with the eyeballs. Eyeballs work just like Maya, whether something's visible or not. So frame 1, just going to hit F6 again. I'm on my translate tool. And again, when I make this first motion, I won't see it because I don't have my control active. So I need to go View, Show, Control. And now, I don't know, let's say 8. What was this? This is 24, right? Let's say 8. We'll do 10 frames. 10 frames up to here. Boom. Cool. And then if this is 10 frames, let's do 12 frames. And let's get it over here into the corner. Same issue. I need to grab my transform, tension to 1. And I want to look at these spaces. I think I need a little bit. Move this to 24. Okay, cool. So 14 frames. That looks pretty good for constant acceleration. Also, I can see this a little slanted, so I'll lift this up. Cool. And then if this was 10 frames up, then this has got to be 10 frames down, so I'll go to 34. Put this here. And I'll probably just go to 44 and put this over here. And then we'll just transform tool, and we'll get these both at the same time. Tension 1. Tension 1. Boom. And then just double check. That looks right. That looks right. Okay, cool. And then now I can have my ghost come on down to here. So if this was, what did I say, 14 frames, we'll try 28 frames, I guess. So I'm on 44. 6472. And I'll move that right on down to here. And again, transform tool, tension to 1. Boom. Look at my line here. Does this look equidistant? I'm actually just cracked. And then now I can start having my ghost come after this guy. Because when the ghost is in the regular mode, it should be trying to eat the Pac-Man. So even though Pac-Man is moonwalking down here. So okay. So let's boom, and we'll get this guy to go here. So what do we think that is? If this was 10 frames, 30. Let's give it a shot. Again, let's transform and tension this. And zoom in. Nope, too much distance here, so that means that this is moving too fast. So I want to increase the number of frames. So I don't know, let's add 4 frames. I'm going to just drag this keyframe forward in time. Another 2 frames maybe. There we go. Okay. So it's 40 frames-ish. 38 frames. Yeah. Cool. Now Pac-Man's here. Now, the key at the end for this ghost is at a certain point at your choosing, the ghost needs to switch from one to the other. We need to change which of our layers in this peg are exposed at which time. So let's say the ghost is now due to swap to the vulnerable ghost at this time at 110. Now, for you folks, you need to have the ghost in the other form, so you can either have it be vulnerable most of the time and then switch into the regular ghost, or you could have it start with the regular ghost and then switch to vulnerable at a certain point. But you should have the other version of it exposed for at least 1/3 of your animation, which would be a minimum of 80 frames for our work. So if you do more or less, or if you do more than that, that's fine. But keep in mind that you can't go any further than 120 for one. Actually, whatever. As long as you have it switched gears for a certain large portion of time, we'll basically call it good. Don't just do it for like the last 10 frames or something. Okay, so I know that at frame 110, this is where after this I would like it to start being vulnerable. So that means that before, from frame 110 and before, it should not be visible. Now, I've had the layer just turned off. Now if I turn it back on, you can see they're both overlapping. Because again, their exposure has lasted the entire 240 frames. So I need to select on frame 110 on the vulnerable ghost layer. I'm going to shift click on the very first frame, and I'm just going to backspace that exposure and get it out. So now for the first 110 frames, I only have the regular ghost exposed. And then, whoops, after frame 110, on the regular ghost layer, so I'll select frame 111, all the way to the end in this case, and I'll delete that. And now the ghost switches to vulnerable. Now those of you that play the game know that that only happens when Pac-Man eats a power pellet. No, I don't expect you to add that. If you want to add that, that's fantastic. It's really cool. I'm not going to grade you up on it. That's unless, you know, like if you just had the power pellet. Like, I've seen people like add the dots and like, you know, have them get deleted every time Pac-Man goes over them. That'll get you extra points, but just having a power pellet, that's cool or not cool, whatever. So now, though, as I continued animating, I would just have the other one visible. So let's say now, though, when it's vulnerable, Pac-Man should be trying to eat the ghost. I won't get on your case if Pac-Man does not switch gears to go eat the ghost. But the ghost should not be going towards Pac-Man anymore when it's vulnerable. That part does matter. So, whether your Pac-Man chases the vulnerable ghost, I don't care. But your vulnerable ghost should not be going towards Pac-Man, and your scary ghost should be going towards Pac-Man. So, you need to make the proper behavior happen in your animation. So, I got my vulnerable ghost here at 110. And I'm going to go, I don't know, probably another 10 frames, I would imagine. Whoops. I'm not on this tool. Get over here. There we go. So probably another 10 frames to here. Now this is where it's problematic because the Pac-Man control's in my way. Get out of here. Sure, that actually looks perfect. So now we're here. Now I can have my ghosty go, I don't know, I'm going to assume, let's do 50, I guess, from here, and we'll see how that goes. So 170 maybe. And we'll just drag this way up here. And again, transform tool, fix that tension up, 1. And then I'll zoom in down here. Oh boy, so good. It's a little off. Let's see. There we go. I added another 4 frames on there. Okay, cool. That looks a little bit more accurate. So now the ghost, if we zoom all the way out, this is what the behavior is going to look like from frame 1. Ghost is going for the patrol. Boom. Actually, never mind. I need to get out. Goes about its business. And then you'll just continue your animation paths until the Pac-Man and the ghosts move through your maze for the entire 240 frames of animation for a total of 10 seconds of completed animation. All right. And then finally, folks, when it comes to the rotation aspect of the Pac-Man, we'll cover that in a small separate video next week because it's cumbersome and this is a lot to process. So today, your focus, if you're working on this, which I'm hoping to hijack some of you and get you to finish up some of your Photoshop work because your grades are due next week. But if you are working on this, just focus on getting those translate keyframes. That's, again, the compass looking one up here at the top. I know you can't see it past my zoom buttons right now. Hold on. That one. Just set those keyframes. All right. Thank you for watching.